Hello, my name's Alan W. Wright, and I am the creator of the Robin Hood website, www.boldoutlaw.com. And I'm going to be doing 3 shows on Howard Pyle. Now, Howard Pyle both wrote and illustrated a very classic work, The Merry Adventures of Robin Hood, of great renown in Nottinghamshire, often just shortened to The Merry Adventures of Robin Hood. And it was first published in 1883 and has been in print pretty much ever since. So I'm just going to start by, I guess I'll jump right in with Howard Pyle's preface. So, preface from the author to the reader. You, who so plod amid serious things that you feel it shame to give yourself up, even for a few short moments, to mirth and joyousness in the land of fancy, you who think that life has naught to do with innocent laughter that can harm no one, these pages are not for you. Clap to the leaves and go no farther than this, for I tell you plainly that if you go farther, you will be scandalized by seeing good, sober folks of real history so frisk and caper in gay colors and motley that you would not know them but for the names tagged to them. Here is a stout, lusty fellow with a quick temper, yet none so ill for all that, who goes by the name of Henry II. Here is a fair, gentle lady, before whom all others bow, and call her Queen Eleanor. Here is a fat rogue of a fellow, dressed up in the rich robes of a clerical kind, that good folk call my Lord Bishop of Hereford. Here is a certain fellow with a sour temper and a grim look, the worshipful, the Sheriff of Nottingham. And here above all is a great, tall, merry fellow that roams the greenwood and joins in homely sports, and sits beside the sheriff at merry feast, which same breath the name of the proudest of Plantagenets, Richard of the Lion's Heart. Beside these there are a whole host of knights, priests, nobles, burghers, yeomen, pages, ladies, lasses, landlords, beggars, peddlers, and what not, all living the merriest of merry lives, and all bound by nothing but a few odd strands of certain old ballads, snipped and clipped and tied together again in a score of knots, which draw these jocund fellows here and there, singing as they go. Here you will find 100 dull, sober, jogging places, all tricked out with flowers and what not, till no one would know them in their fanciful dress. And here is a country, bearing a well-known name, wherein no chill mists press upon our spirits, and no rain falls, but what rolls off our backs like April showers off the backs of sleek drakes, where flowers bloom forever and birds are always singing, where every fellow has a merry catch as he travels the roads, and ale and beer and wine, such as muddle no wits, flow like water in a brook. This country is not fairyland. What is it? 'Tis the land of fancy, and is of that pleasant kind that when you tire of it, whisk, you clap the leaves of this book together, and 'tis gone, and you are ready for everyday life with no harm done. And now I lift the curtain that hangs between here and no man's land. Will you come with me, sweet reader? I thank you. Give me your hand. Now, I'm not going to ask for your hand, really, because I'm doing this recording. Well, we're all pretty much stuck in our homes because of COVID-19. But anyway, what Pyle is talking about in his introduction, the land of fancy, is something that's been present in the Robin Hood legend from the earliest ballads. The eternal summer. It's one that you can find in the opening lines of the earliest surviving Robin Hood ballad, Robin Hood and the Monk, from around 1460, which goes, "In summer, when the shaws be shane, and the leaves be large and long, It is full merry in the fair forest to hear the fowl song, to see the deer drawn to the dale and leave the hills high, and the shadow him and the leaves green under the greenwood tree. And you see a sylvan paradise like that in another early Robin Hood ballad, Robin Hood and the Potter. In summer, when the leaves spring, the blossoms on each bough, so merry do the birds sing, in woods merry now. Now, I apologize, as I am not a scholar of Middle English, so if my pronunciation is a little off, apologies. But the eternal summer of Robin Hood and that kind of playful thing is carried forward. You see it in a lot of the films, such as The Adventures of Robin Hood from 1938 with Errol Flynn, which is filmed in Chico, California, which is a lot more sun-drenched than England usually is. And it also gets a reference by this guy, Doctor Who, when in 2014 they had an episode called Robot of Sherwood, or Robots of Sherwood, where he traveled back to medieval England of Robin Hood's time and found it sun-drenched and beautiful in eternal summer, in this case due to the influences of an alien spaceship. But that idea of a fanciful realm of Robin Hood is carried forward from those early ballads to Pyle and into films like Errol Flynn. And it's a sort of vision of England which is now discarded in favor of mud and grey and murkiness, though not always with intelligence. I mean, a lot of the more modern Robin Hood films really stress how much mud there is in them and how much it's not the land of fancy. And yet their writing is as fanciful as anything that Howard Pyle ever came up with. They just drench it in mud. So, why cover Howard Pyle? Why cover children's writer of 100 years ago? It's not that Pyle is the first to do what he did, which, as he said, was to snip and clip and tie old ballads into knots, which is what his children's novel, The Merry Adventures of Robin Hood, is woven from, is the original ballad adventures, especially the later broadsides and a couple of the earlier ones too. That's not where Pyle innovated. He wrote his in 1883, and in 1850, Joseph Cudnell, writing under the name of Stephen Percy, wrote a very famous children's book that did very much the same thing, which is take the ballad stories and weave them together for children. And Percy wasn't the first to do that either. Around the same time, I mean, there was a three-decker bigger novel by Pierce Egan that was serialized in England. And even that goes back to an earlier tradition of the prose lives of Robin Hood, which were prose recounting of various ballad things sewn together. And this tradition of the prose lives, I think the earliest one is from around 1600, which is contained in the Sloane manuscript. And weaving ballads together, it goes back even further than that, because one of the earliest Robin Hood ballads we have, and one of the most influential up until the present day, through Pyle, borrows from it, and the films borrow from it, and the TV shows borrow from it, and that's A Jest of Robin Hood, which survives in several printed editions from around 1500, and again was probably composed in the late 1400s. And that ballad contains several sort of separate adventures. There's the story of Robin Hood helping a knight in distress and robbing the monks of St. Mary's Abbey in the process. There's a story within the jest where Little John enters the sheriff's service and robs him. There's the archery contest that you've seen in many, many films. There's the pardoning by the king and then there's a little snippet of Robinson's death, all of which Pyle adapts to. And so these probably existed as ballads and stories on their own that were strung together by the writer of the jest. So Pyle is working on a long tradition. He's working in a tradition that goes all the way back to the earliest Robin Hoods that we have. So why, when I went to an academic conference in Pyle's birthplace of Wilmington, Delaware, United States of America, did I say that Howard Pyle is considered the author of Robin Hood? I see that quote occasionally on the internet, taken a little out of the original context I said, because you can see I've just given you hundreds of years of tradition, that Robin Hood existed for centuries before Howard Pyle. The earliest clear literary reference to him is in 1377, when a character in Piers Plowman says that he knows the rhymes of Robin Hood better than he knows the Lord's Prayer. And about 100 years before that, you start to see people with combined surnames like Robe Hood and Robin Hood, which may suggest that they came by these names, even though in one case the person's father was named Robert Hood. But the idea of combining names into one last name might be because Robin Hood's name was already famous and attached to a legend. So it goes back centuries before Pyle, but Pyle's edition remains in print. I mean, a lot of academic stuff print things from the 19th century, but Pyle's you can find in any bookstore. You can find it in any classic edition. It is the sort of, at least I would say around the world, certainly in North America, the default text for Robin Hood. And it is in many versions, like this pocketbook here, or this big little book, I guess you would call it, which is very sort of, now it doesn't use Pyle's illustrations. It does have an altered version of his text, but it's very comic book-like art. And a lot of the ones, I should say, don't even use Pyle's text either. They say they're adapted from Howard Pyle, but they aren't they don't have Pyle's distinct touches. They are no different than the prose lives or what Percy did. They're just another sort of combination of classic Robin Hood stories, and yet Pyle's name is such importance they attach it to it. There's another edition I have, I think, from the 1960s. Again, very different art. One of the better goes of doing Pyle with new art is this one from the 1980s, which is Pyle's text, and it's illustrated by Mike Grell, who is quite a famous comic book artist. In fact, if you go to my website, the central image of Errol Flynn that's drawn by Mike Grell was commissioned especially for my website. And among Grell's more famous comic book work is that of Green Arrow, which is a very Robin Hood-like figure, and you can see that Grell's Robin Hood is very similar to his Green Arrow, though you could say that since about 1969, Green Arrow himself was drawn to look a lot like Howard Pyle's Robin Hood. And then there's one that goes a lot farther away from the tradition. I'd like to thank again Dr. Valerie Johnson for bringing this to my attention many, many years ago. It's this printing. Because, when I think of Robin Hood, I think of a guy in a trench coat blazing away with two pistols. I'm not sure that Howard Pyle, who is a Quaker and committed to nonviolence, would approve of such a cover on his book. And really, the Mike Grell one I showed you is great art, and Mike Grell is an amazing artist, and I'll just throw out a quick plug that he's actually working with another Robin Hood connection, Mark Ryan, who played Nazir and Robin of Sherwood, and they're currently, as I record this, finishing up a Kickstarter campaign for their work, The Pilgrim. So you might want to go search that out on Kickstarter by Mark Ryan and Mike Grell. But as amazing as Grell's art is, he himself admits it's kind of redundant to do Pyle without Pyle's art, because Pyle is an amazing artist. He founded an entire school of classic American illustration. You'll see it there. That's the frontispiece. I'm not actually sure how to pronounce that word. Can someone just write in and tell me that I'm getting that right or wrong and how to say it? Because for years I've never actually been certain. There is one of Little John on the bridge with Robin running away, and here is Robin Hood's last arrow, which you might know that classic story. So there's some of Pyle's art, which is fantastic. And, you know, it took me quite a few years to truly appreciate his text, because Pyle is, as you can even see from his preface, deliberately archaic. He's deliberately archaic for 1883. He's absolutely archaic for 2020. But he's very descriptive, and there is a certain poetry and style to it. And I'll get into that more as I go on. And as for the art, he, as I said, he was born and raised in Wilmington, Delaware, and in the 1890s he was teaching at the Drexel Institute, and then around 1898 he started teaching summers at Chaddsford, Pennsylvania, on the banks of the Brandywine River. And in 1900 he set up the Howard Pyle School of Illustration there, which has later become a tradition known as the Brandywine School. And you can actually, well, once this quarantine and COVID-19 is hopefully an unpleasant memory of the distant past, you can visit the Brandywine Museum, as I did back in 2005, and see the tradition of that school and some of the art there. He had many famous pupils. Perhaps most famously is N.C. Wyeth, who did his own illustrations for Robin Hood a few years later, and Wyeth's son, Andrew Wyeth, and his grandson, Jamie Wyeth, are also famous artists. And really, Pyle set the tradition of American illustration for adventure fiction in the late 19th century and the first several decades of the 20th century. I mean, Pyle himself did King Arthur. He did a wonderful medieval book called Otto of the Silver Hand, Treasure Islands, and you know, Wyeth continued with the same things. Wyeth did a Robin Hood and a King Arthur and I think a Treasure Island and the Black Arrow and quite a few other classic works of illustration as well. So that if you were growing up, say about 100 years ago from now, the traditions of Howard Pyle set up, that's what you would be reading as a kid. That would be, in a way, your movies before movies, your TV before TVs, would be Pyle's illustrations and his art. And his Robin Hood is one of the things that really set him on the map. And so it lasts, both in art and text, to the present day. And in the next section, in the next couple of videos, I'll be reading his prologue, which first has the origin of Robin Hood, how he became an outlaw, and then in the one after that, I'll do the section where he meets Little John for the first time. So I'm going to sign off now with this introductory video, and I'd just like to say, because we are living in the specter of COVID-19, I brought this fellow up before. Please listen to the doctors, listen to the scientists. Do not listen to the Prince Johns of the world, the money-grubbing tyrants. Don't listen to them. go listen to your doctors and your scientists. Anyway, that's it for now. Alan W. Wright from boldoutlaw.com. Thanks very much, and I'll talk to you next time.